Hello and welcome to episode 606 of the official EstablishTheRun.com podcast. My name is Adam Levitan, and draft season is undoubtedly upon us. It's enough already with the best ball. It's enough already with the Dynasty. It's enough with the preseason DFS. Actually, it's never enough with the preseason DFS. But anyways, it is time indeed to crack our knuckles and come up with a plan to beat our friends, our coworkers, our enemies in our home leagues. For that today, I am joined by two of the top strategists on our team, Drew Dinkmeyer and Jack Miller. Drew, how's it going today?
Just re-listening back to some of these episodes from last year, and all I can say is I'm glad to be here. I will not be filling in Mike's shoes of making sure never to recommend taking a running back at any point in the draft. I've come well equipped to talk running backs today.
Yes, many of you probably know Drew as an NBA guy. Can confirm that Drew is equally as sharp in the NFL, and he is doing thousands, I repeat, thousands of drafts this offseason. The summer of Team No Sex for Drew. Anyways, Jack, how's it going today?
It's going well. I don't know if I'm going to reach the thousands mark personally this year, but excited to be on to talk home league strategy today.
On today's show, we're going to discuss strategy for people picking from the 1, 2, 3, or 4 spots in their draft. In the next two episodes, we'll hit the rest of the spots in the draft. Before we get into it, two things. First, we are covering college football this season. We will be covering it with the same intensity we cover the NFL. First slate is coming this Saturday. I repeat, first college football slate is this Saturday. Our projections are already live. Head to the college football tab on EstablishTheRun.com for details. I expect our projections and our projected ownership will be the industry standard right away, just as they are for NFL, NBA, and PGA. Second, I cannot tell you how closely all of us, the entire team at the NFL side, is monitoring all the news and working on all the data and takes that go into our season-long rankings. If you have a draft coming up, check out everything in our draft kit, including rankings for 24 different formats. Draft kit starts at just $34.99. All right, let's get into it here, boys. First of all, most people just default to wanting an early pick. Like, I want the 1.1. I want the 1.2. I want to be really high. I'm not sure that picking in the top 4 this year is actually my favorite. I can hear arguments on both sides. Drew, I'll start with you. Do you like getting a pick 1 through 4 here? And where is your favorite spot to pick? And we're talking about home leagues again.
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting question because it's sort of changed as the draft season has gone on for me. Early in the draft season, there were some depressed running back values that were allowing guys like Saquon Barkley, Tony Pollard, Derrick Henry, maybe to fall towards like late second and into the early third. And that seemed to create a sweet spot for this 1 through 4 area where you would get one of those elite players, but still have access to some running backs with high-end upside. As the draft season has gone on and contract situations have been more settled in some running back rooms and unsettled in others, it's actually created a little bit of value right now where I think the middle of the draft is really intriguing to me in allowing you to get access to maybe one of the high-end wide receiver options like a Tyreek Hill, like a Cooper Kupp in that like 6, 7, 8 range, and then still get access to one of those high-end running backs. Or if the running backs go, you still get access to like a Garrett Wilson, a Devontae Adams, an Amon-Ra St. Brown, someone like that feels like really, really good starts. At the very tail end of the first round, you get into a spot where there's almost too many good guys to choose from, and you're not like you're picking your best of the bunch, but you're not getting that advantage of that earlier third round pick. So I think the middle of the draft right now is where I'd most likely like to be.
I could not agree more. Like, to me, the perfect start is like Cooper Kupp, Tony Pollard, or something like that. And you can get that sometimes, depending on the league. You might be able to get that in home leagues. Anyways, Jack, we are here to talk about spots 1 through 4. I think you can make a case for someone other than Justin Jefferson at number 1. It's going to be a thin case, though, considering what Justin Jefferson has done through the first 3 years of his career. We have Justin Jefferson 1, Jamar Chase 2. After that, it can start to get a little bit more fluid in terms of what your preference is in the 3 and 4 spots. Jack, how do you think about it in 1, 2, 3, and 4 with your first round pick?
Yeah, I think Jefferson and Chase are probably the top 2 in most formats. Maybe in standard leagues, you do default to running back and take a McCaffrey or an Eckler. But they're so dependent on their pass catching volume too, that even in standard leagues, there's a pretty good argument for just taking Jefferson and Chase. And then at 3 and 4, I think McCaffrey and Eckler are the two that I would prefer, and that's who we have as the top four across all rankings formats is Jefferson, Chase, McCaffrey, and Eckler. The order changes a little bit based on the exact format, but those are our consensus top four. I think you can make an argument for Tyreek Hill as well. He was so dominant last year when Tua Tagovailoa was healthy. His 29.4% target share was fourth in the NFL. But McCaffrey and Eckler, just to have those dual threat running backs who are contributing in all facets, they're game script proof. They're going to score a lot of touchdowns. So those are the two guys I'd take at 3 and 4.
Yeah, in full PPR, and we're talking about half PPR home leagues today. In full PPR, I am really tempted by Tyreek Hill or Cooper Kupp at that 4 spot. I do like Christian McCaffrey at 3 there because I can start running back and start these hero running back builds, which I think to me are my preferred way to build this year. When you start with Christian McCaffrey, you set yourself up immediately for a hero RB build because as Dink said, that Barkley Chubb Pollard is probably going to go before it gets back to you. And then you still get really good wide receiver options. You know, T. Higgins will probably be there. Olave, maybe Garrett Wilson gets there. Maybe Jalen Waddle gets there. Devontae Smith, et cetera, et cetera. And you can get 2 of those guys to pair with McCaffrey. To me, that's an awesome start. Drew, I'm curious what you would do at spots 3 and 4 in a home league setting.
Yeah, so Jack alluded to this, but really understanding your league settings and your league mates is really important at some of these picks, because if you're in a format that is more weighted towards running backs, i.e. you only start 2 wide receivers, i.e. it's half PPR, i.e. it's standard league, i.e. you're in a league that drafts a lot of running backs, then it's more reason to maybe push Austin Eckler into that 4 spot over Cooper Kupp and Tyreek Hill, because you have a good feeling that your league mates are more likely to take those running backs early. That's going to allow you to have the wide receivers kind of fall into your lap in the back half of the 2nd round and into the early 3rd round. And 2, the format might also benefit that. Whereas if you're in a 3 wide receiver league, a full PPR league, so on and so forth, that's where it opens up more room for Tyreek Hill and Cooper Kupp. Personally, I would have them in the more wide receiver heavy formats. I would have them ranking personally right now, Cooper Kupp, then Austin Eckler, then Tyreek Hill. In the more running back heavy formats, I'd have Austin Eckler, then Cooper Kupp, then Tyreek Hill.
Okay. Depending on how you start, I think is important for your round 2. In other words, if you start with Jefferson or Chase and it gets back to you and there's no running backs that you want available, in other words, Saquon, Chubb, Pollard, Derrick Henry are all gone, which I think is a pretty good bet if you have one of the first 2 picks. Then you get into a spot where it's like, man, there's not many other running backs I really want to take here. You could throw caution to the wind and go Jonathan Taylor or Josh Jacobs. I guess I'm personally not doing that. And so then you start to get into these really wide receiver heavy builds, because if it gets back to you, started with Chase or Jefferson, it gets back to you, the best options are clearly wide receiver. You could start your draft wide receiver, wide receiver, wide receiver. Now, while I like doing that in highly competitive leagues, in full PPR leagues, I'm not sure that's best for home leagues. And that's where people start to mix quarterback in, right? That's where people say, oh, let me go get a Jalen Hurts here. Let me get a Josh Allen here. Jack, what do you think about the 2-3 turn when you have a top 2 pick?
I think taking a quarterback here is viable. We've seen in the past couple of years how the gap between the low-end quarterbacks and the elite ones like a Hurts and an Allen has just grown tremendously. If you get Hurts, you could maybe pair him with Devontae Smith and get a nice stack. We talk about stacking in best ball a lot, but the idea extends to home leagues too, of trying to capture that correlation. And if Hurts and Devontae Smith hit big, then it makes the other one hitting big if one of them succeeds. And then I also think Mark Andrews is pretty viable here. There's been a lot of talk from Baltimore about the Ravens passing more. I know we're pretty high on the Baltimore passing game, and so much of the focus is on the wide receivers and who's going to break out from the wide receivers. But Andrews has been a massive target earner the past couple of years, 25-30% range. And I think this is a pretty good spot to take him if you start with a Jefferson or a Chase and don't want to triple up at receiver.
Yeah, the smaller the league is, the more likely I'm going to take Andrews here. In a 10-team league, Jack wrote about this. There's an article up on the site. Now, Mark Andrews is way more valuable in a 10-team league than he is in a 14-team league. To understand more on why, again, please check out Jack's article. The thing is, Dink, if we do start wide receiver this year, I don't think it's that bad, because at the 4-5 turn and at some of these spots in 6-7, 7-8 even, there are some pretty solid running backs. We can get into some of them here in a second, but I don't know. Home league, I don't typically like to start wide receiver, wide receiver, wide receiver. What do you think about those kind of starts here, Dink?
Yeah, I feel similarly to you that with the way the board falls, often that late 4, early 5, that late 6, early 7 does provide some running back opportunities, regardless of how heavy the room that you're in drafts running backs. Because really, when we talk about how heavy a room drafts running backs, it's really like the first 2 rounds in terms of how it moves things. And then things sort of normalize over time. The positions sort of level out. And so there's going to be opportunities that if you want to pass on the running back position early, I think that's ultimately fine. Really, with these situations, the 2 guys that you're likely thinking of here in this range, late 2, early 3, is Josh Jacobs and Jonathan Taylor. And that's really like a risk tolerance. How do you feel about the situation? What do you really think these guys are going to do this year? I know there's a wide range of opinions on Jonathan Taylor and whether he played through injuries or different things like that. Josh Jacobs, whether he's even going to report. So I think it's okay if you want to push that risk off to a later round selection at the running back position, because the wide receivers here are very solid, and the quarterback and tight end options also, especially in those 10-team leagues, are especially valuable as well.
As we move into the middle rounds here, one thing to note, if your league is very running back heavy, they're just less likely to take running backs in the middle and late, right? They're like, oh, I already have 2 or 3. I'm just going to stop, right? And that gives us a chance at 4 or 5, I think, if we don't have a running back yet, to be totally fine. Kenneth Walker could be there. Alexander Madison could be there. Breece Hall's stock is sinking like a stone. And then you have the tier that, I assume Ramondre will be gone by here, but then you do have the tier that I don't really like a ton, but is viable. Miles Sanders, Cam Akers, J.K. Dobbins, Dameon Pierce types. I don't love those guys. I'd personally rather wait for David Montgomery, James Cook, who we'll get into here in a second. But my point is that if you did start wide receiver, wide receiver, wide receiver, or wide receiver, tight end, don't panic at running back, I guess is my point. There is a lot that's here later. I mentioned the running backs. Jack, anything else for people to think about at the 4-5 turn here when you have a very early pick?
I think you mostly covered it. Maybe if you missed on the Hurts or Allen or just decided to pass on them, you could consider Burrow or Herbert or Justin Fields here. But otherwise, I think I like to take receivers at this turn. But if you started wide receiver heavy, then it's certainly viable to take a running back or 2.
Yeah, I think the quarterback point is interesting. We are a bit lower than market on Justin Fields, which scares me. But basically for him to get there, like he needs to repeat what he did rushing last year, which is no small feat. And then also like separate massively from the tier below him. And he's gonna have to do that with his arm a little bit. And by the tier below him, I mean like you can wait a little bit and get Trevor Lawrence or Daniel Jones or Tua or Cousins. I mean, Fields, if you use a round 4 pick on him or an early round 5 pick, he's really going to have to get there again rushing and separate from these guys later. It's a bet that I think is maybe a slightly thin, but I could see Justin Fields just completely going off again. So Drew, what do you think about quarterback at 4-5? Jack did bring up some very viable names.
Yeah, and it's interesting because, in these managed leagues, home leagues, you do have the ability to stream, which is different than best ball or some of these other formats that you'll talk about during the course of the preseason. And so that allows me a little bit more comfort in just letting quarterback kind of find a value for me, letting quarterback find me during the draft instead of me trying to find quarterback during the draft. And so while guys like Justin Fields, Justin Herbert, or Joe Burrow are all viable options here and certainly would be more plausible options if, for example, I had Jamar Chase, maybe I'd be a little bit more interested in Burrow. I'd still like to let that fall to me. So I'd still prefer to have it in the 5th round instead of the 4th round if we're talking about this turn area. And knowing that some of the names you brought up, Trevor Lawrence, Daniel Jones, Anthony Richardson, someone we'll talk about later, in these leagues where you have the managed element that you can stream things if things go wrong, that people are going to drop quarterbacks during the course of the season to cover bye weeks and whatnot. There's going to be options there on the wire for you. I'm more willing to kind of let the quarterback position find me during the draft.
Yeah, and that's the way I like to play season-long managed also, getting it shoved down our throats by Jalen Hurts. Oh, well, we had Jalen Hurts last year, getting it shoved down our throats by the early round guys like Josh Allen, Patrick Mahomes for a while. Hasn't been fun. But yeah, I think that we'll see a more condensing of quarterback, and these guys just really need to have absolute outlier stuff to pay it off. We'll talk about some quarterbacks later that we like. The 6-7 spot is where, to me, it starts to get really interesting at running back. Like, if I will go hero RB and I have David Montgomery as my RB2, I'm totally fine with that. If I have James Cook as my RB2, I'm totally fine with that. You can make a case for Rashad White or DeAndre Swift. I'm not as much on those guys, but I think you can make a pretty good case for those guys being fine as your RB2. Pacheco goes super late here. And like, man, I'm talking about guys that go in like the 6th, 7th, 8th round. So again, I am not forcing it at running back through this range that I don't particularly like. Again, the range that I am not personally going running back in is this Aaron Jones, Miles Sanders, Cam Akers, J.K. Dobbins, Dameon Pierce spots. I'm taking quarterback, wide receiver, tight end over those guys a ton. So again, not panicking, but 6, 7 is where I start to really hone in on running back, I think, from this spot, especially if I started McCaffrey as my hero RB, or I was able to somehow get a Pollard type in round 2. Jack, what do you think about as we move to the 6, 7 turn here? We might not, if we didn't take Andrews, we might not have a tight end yet here either.
Yeah, I'm with you in terms of this is when I like to start targeting running backs. And if you follow our strategy, I guess, then you would feel pretty light at running back through 6 rounds. But the goal is kind of to assemble a group of guys with upside. And so the archetype that I generally look for is players with some sort of week 1 role who have the potential to grow into a significantly larger role and really turn in a top 15 season if something breaks their way. And so, David Montgomery is filling in the Jamal Williams role in the Detroit offense. And if Jahmyr Gibbs gets hurt or misses time for whatever reason, he's shown the ability to catch passes before and be in a 3-down role. So I think that's a great example. James Cook is getting a lot of hype from Buffalo camp. He's another fantastic example as the guy who should have the pass catching role right away and maybe lacks the upside for a 3-down role, but a Kamara type role is certainly possible for him.
I mean, this range of tight end here, Dink, and we're talking about Kyle Pitts, Darren Waller, Dallas Goedert. In managed, I'm more likely to go get one of these guys versus in best ball, I'm skipping over it and trying to piece things together with volume late. And we're not going to get this deep here on this show. But if you wanted to really get nuts, like Tyler Higbee, Dalton Kincaid, Chig Okonkwo, Gerald Everett, Jake Ferguson, Dalton Schultz. I mean, there are a lot of tight ends you can get with like a 12th, 13th, 14th, 15th round pick. But in managed, I'm more likely, I think, to go for one of these guys, a Pitts, Waller, Goddard, Ingram type. 6, 7 feels like a bit of a stretch to me for some of these guys, but I can see the merit for it. What do you think about tight end here as we get into 6, 7, Ding?
I like this range for tight end. And those 3 guys you mentioned, Pitts, Waller, Goddard, I'm overweight on, even in best ball. So I like it in all formats here because I do think you can have that end of season, that guy that kind of puts other players away at the position. And in managed leagues, as you alluded to, it's just so much easier on your roster. And one of the things I like doing in building rosters in managed leagues, one of the reasons I like going wide receiver heavier early is I like to know on the waiver wire what I'm looking for each and every week. That every week when I go to waivers, I'm not like, oh, I kind of could use a tight end. Maybe I need a stream of defense. Maybe I need a stream of quarterback. Oh, there's that running back that, kind of broke out there. I don't know which bids to place. I like to sort of have all my wide receivers lined up, have that one tight end that I kind of know. And then it's like, okay, my focus on the waiver wire is to fill out the back end of the bench with just running back upside options each week. And so I like tight end here as another option as well. I'm pretty in on Dallas Goedert this year. I just think it's one of the cheapest ways to get access to this Eagles offense that's going to be very explosive and perhaps have to pass even more this year than in last year when they were playing from ahead so much. So I like him along with the running back profiles you talked about. I'll add one other name to that mix who's risen a little bit of late in draft season is Javonte Williams, who he just has the profile that if he is healthy, which I think is obviously a big question mark after coming off of the multiple tears in his knee, that he has the path to getting into that top 15 running back workload that Jack had talked about overall.
What if James Cook just is actually good and ices everyone in Buffalo? I'm just saying, this is not a micro show. I'm just putting it out there. What if he's actually like awesome and just ices everyone? I mean, it's going to look laughable where James Cook is going now. So I just wanted to put that out there. Okay. One more spot to talk about is this 8-9 spot. And I think the key here is that if you don't have a quarterback yet, how far behind are we? Because when you show up to 8-9, Trevor Lawrence is probably gone. Deshaun Watson is probably gone. Justin Herbert's definitely gone. We are left with Daniel Jones, Tua Tagovailoa, Dak Prescott, Anthony Richardson, Kirk Cousins, Geno Smith. In previous iterations of home leagues fantasy football, I would be totally fine with that tier. I have a pit in my stomach now being okay with that tier because I have visions of Jalen Hurts and Josh Allen going for 40 points every week and me being unable to match that with Tua, Cousins, Dak types etc. So from a macro perspective, Dink, how bad do you think it is to not have a quarterback here by the time we show up at 8-9 in our home league?
Well, I think the big thing is it really places an emphasis on having hit that second and third round picks, right? Because if you go without a quarterback, without a Jalen Hurts and Mahomes, Josh Allen in that range, and you hit on those picks, you still can make up and kind of get there. But if you miss on those picks, which comes back to the risk tolerance stuff on like Josh Jacobs, Jonathan Taylor, and whatnot, then you're really playing from behind in this situation. So I still think the upside quarterbacks here, Daniel Jones, Anthony Richardson, are really, really interesting in managed leagues. I think if you have Justin Jefferson stacking with Kirk Cousins and hoping Jefferson brings Cousins along is totally fine. Same with Tua and Tyreek or Waddle if you land on those guys. But obviously, week in and week out, you're probably giving up 8 to 10 points on these guys in terms of ceiling, in terms of what they can do to kind of bury you. And so you need to really have made sure that you feel really good about those second and third round picks, that they're giving you that advantage on the other teams that you're playing, their 8th and 9th round picks when you're starting to look at the quarterback position.
Last thing I wanted to bring up here, Jack, is that this 8-9 range to me is like the last spot where if I need wide receiver, I feel good about it. And there's a lot of guys that I think are going to go pretty late here. Gabe Davis, Quentin Johnston, Brandon Cooks, George Pickens, Jahan Dotson, Treylon Burks, Zay Flowers, Cortland Sutton. To me, this is like the last gasp wide receiver to get actual high-end production before it starts to really, really thin out at the wide receiver position. So as much as we've emphasized getting wide receivers, I don't want to let this tier of wide receiver go past me here at 8-9 if I'm even a little bit thin at wide receiver. I want to get another one of these guys. So yeah, maybe that's different if you started wide receiver. Well, I'm probably not needing a wide receiver in this range. Other starts though, I still like to be in on wide receiver here. Jack, any thoughts on that? Anything else in the later parts here for people drafting at the beginning of the round one?
Yeah, I agree with what you said about this being a high upside wide receiver tier. I do think it's important to emphasize that if you started wide receiver heavy, you don't really need it. And there are some running backs here too, like A.J. Dillon, Antonio Gibson, Zach Charbonnet, who have some interesting upside too. So I find myself taking running back here a good amount too. And then on quarterbacks, I think if you didn't get one of the top ones, it's historically what I've done is, you can wait pretty long and then you just take one, and if he doesn't work out, you can stream it. I don't mind drafting 2 quarterbacks here. You can get an Anthony Richardson and a Kirk Cousins or something like that, especially if you're in a league where most people draft 2 quarterbacks, which I found most home leagues tend to do regardless of whether it's optimal or not. So I don't mind doubling up on these kind of low-end upside quarterbacks and either playing matchups between them and also just hoping one of them kind of ascends into that mid QB1 tier and giving yourself more shots at finding someone that can at least compete with an Allen or a Hurts.
Yeah, I think that's totally fair. I would caution people to understand how big your bench is, right? Obviously, the bigger the bench, the more room you have to carry a second quarterback. On small benches, I like to leave those bench spots for running backs and wide receivers who I think at the beginning of the year have a chance to break out. So yeah, definitely understand how deep your roster is. All right. We've covered it all for people drafting from spots 1, 2, 3, or 4 this year. We'll be back next episode to talk about spots 5, 6, 7, and 8. Be sure you're following Dink at Drew Dinkmeyer and Jack. What is it, Jack? At Jack Miller 01 or something like that?
Jack Miller 02.
At Jack Miller 02. There's a lot of Jack Millers out there. If the actual Jack Miller who has that handle is out there, please get in touch with us. We might be able to make a financial compensation in your favor. All right. For Dink. For Jack. For producer Luke, I am Adam. Good luck, everybody.